This occurred a few weeks ago, and despite my desire to believe otherwise, I suspect it's an ongoing situation. While I don't live in the woods, my home sits at the edge of what I would define as a suburban area rich in nature. There are plenty of trees, wildlife, and the like. One side of our property borders a small wooded area, but it might be more accurate to label it a wooded patch, since it's only about a quarter mile from our land to the road at the other end. That road leads up to another street, and across from that road lies this vast body of water that has always piqued my curiosity. Growing up, I thought it was some kind of reservoir, given the numerous no trespassing and government property signs posted along the surrounding fence. However, here's the odd part. The name of this supposed reservoir doesn't appear on either Google Maps or Apple Maps, which would surely happen if it were indeed a reservoir. I found that quite puzzling. I've searched for information on it multiple times over the years and never found anything official, but its existence has certainly sparked some intriguing discussions among my siblings and me. As a member of my school's varsity cross-country team, I'm always on the lookout for great places to run. That wooded area has become my preferred route since it's exactly a 2-mile loop through the woods, alongside the road by the water, and back again. It's far quieter than running in my actual neighborhood, which lacks sidewalks and features winding roads with poor visibility where drivers go way too fast. With the season rapidly approaching, I had increased my running routine. On the day everything unfolded, I could have sworn I heard some rustling behind me while making my way back through the woods after my run, but I figured it was likely just some form of wildlife. Fast forward to that evening. During the summer, I always sleep with my windows open because I enjoy the sounds of nature at night, especially when it rains. And that night, it rained heavily. A few hours after I returned home, a massive thunderstorm broke out unexpectedly. It was magnificent. I lay in bed, listening to the rain and thunder as I drifted off to sleep when I heard something that definitely wasn't part of the storm. It was subtle at first, but it persisted. It was a soft sobbing or crying sound. The more I focused on it, the more it seemed to be emanating from right beneath my bedroom window, sounding increasingly human, just as I started to doubt whether it was a product of the storm. A gentle female voice pierced through the rain, saying clearly, "Can you help me? I'm cold." I've never moved so quickly in my life. It felt like my primal instincts kicked in before fear could stall me. I leaped out of bed, dashed to the front door, and sprinted around the side of the house, toward my bedroom window. The rain was coming down so hard that I was drenched within moments, but I didn't care. I needed to act. Despite the fear invoked by that voice, it hadn't crossed my mind that something potentially sinister was occurring. My only thought was that someone was genuinely in danger, and just as I turned the corner, there she was. Crouching right under my window was a woman dressed in white garments, perhaps a nightgown or a dress, huddling as if she were trying to stay dry under the small overhang of my window. I approached her cautiously and asked if she needed assistance. The entire scenario felt surreal, but then everything shifted from 0 to 100 in a matter of seconds. As soon as she noticed me, she sprang up and rushed towards me with an unexpected burst of energy. I barely had time to prepare for contact, but mid-stride, she seemed to hesitate. Maybe she noticed my height. I can't say for certain. However, instead of engaging with me, she altered her trajectory and darted towards the woods. I stood there in shock as she vanished into the darkness, moving impossibly fast for someone barefoot. I didn't pursue her and hurried back inside, still soaked. I then woke my dad. When I recounted what had occurred, He was just as unnerved as I was. We checked to ensure every window and door in the house was locked. We contemplated calling the police, but it was already past midnight, and we figured that by the time they arrived, the woman would have long since disappeared. Furthermore, searching the woods in a thunderstorm seemed pointless and potentially hazardous for anyone who might have to do it, assuming they even agreed to. Thus, we decided to tackle it in the morning if needed. Eventually, I managed to fall back asleep, and the next few days passed uneventfully. My dad and I chalked the incident up to two possible explanations: a homeless individual seeking shelter, or someone experiencing a mental breakdown. However, that night wasn't the conclusion of our ordeal. In fact, it was more like the beginning. About a week after the initial event, I was out for one of my usual runs. As I approached the connecting road, I happened to glance through the barbed wire fence towards the water. To my surprise, there was actual movement down by the water's edge. I halted my run and looked more closely. There, sitting at the water's edge with her feet dangling in, was a woman. I froze in sheer terror. How was she even there? The fence surrounding that property didn't have any visible gaps that I've ever noticed, and it's topped with barbed wire, plus it stands about 10 feet tall. I must have made some noise. Perhaps I gasped, because despite being quite a distance away, she suddenly turned her head and stared directly at me. In that moment, I had no doubt she was the same woman who had been crouching under my bedroom window during the thunderstorm. The instant she saw me, she got up and sprinted towards the fence with an utterly crazed look in her eyes. She pressed her face against the chain link and just stood there, grinning at me. And it wasn't a normal smile, trust me. I yelled that I was calling the police, hoping to scare her off. I suppose it worked because the moment I said it, she turned and dove straight into the water. It was so disconcerting and unnatural that I felt unsafe just standing there. I immediately called 911 and tried to explain what was happening. I attempted to keep her in sight, but she swam out of view before the police arrived. When they finally did show up, they took my statement and said they'd investigate the area. They told me to carry on my day normally, which surprised me. I haven't seen her since, but I've begun to hear noises outside my bedroom window at night. Not crying like the first instance, but just general sounds of someone moving out there. It's making me increasingly paranoid, and I just know something else is about to unfold. I've actually been hesitant to go running because I don't want to encounter her again. I understand she's likely mentally unstable and may have followed me home one day after a run. But the biggest mystery to me remains how she managed to reach the other side of the fence. My sister and I have spent hours trying to find a way into that area. I'm telling you, it's impossible. My cousin Nick, who has a penchant for conspiracy theories, is convinced there's something more to the reservoir that the government is trying to hide. But I believe that's absurd. Still, I've never felt more uneasy in my own home. Story 2 asterisk, let me just say this outright. I'm a middle-aged man in a failed marriage. My wife and I argue about everything. I can't quite recall what sparked our latest fight. Likely something trivial. I ended up storming out of the house, a routine occurrence at this point. Typically, I just take a hotel room in situations like these, but I didn't want her to come after me. So, I opted for a different solution. I own a piece of land in a remote area that I've been meaning to reap. It used to be a shooting range or something similar, but honestly, I'm not sure. The previous owner passed away, and his estate was eager to unload it. The building itself is this odd, concrete block structure consisting of a few warehouse-style rooms on the ground floor and an office area on the upper level. Although it's just a few rooms, it's relatively I decided to spend the night there, confident she wouldn't be able to find me. I drove the 20 minutes along increasingly desolate roads, and about halfway there, I noticed dark clouds gathering. By the time I arrived, I could hear thunder rumbling in the distance. I parked in what once was a parking lot just as the first drops of rain began to fall. I keep a spare set of keys tucked behind a loose piece of siding, which I easily located. By the time I settled in, the storm had really intensified. The building has a metal roof, and the rain was drumming down hard enough that it sounded like someone was dumping gravel on it. There's a reasonably comfortable cot in what I assume was once the office on the second floor. That's where I intended to sleep. Once I got settled, for the first time in weeks, I finally felt some peace, despite the storm raging outside. In fact, the sound of the rain was quite soothing, making the place feel entirely cut off from the world. But, of course, nice things never last for me. No sooner had I started to feel drowsy than the sound of shattering glass shattered the calm of the storm. My heart raced instantly. I lay there for about 30 seconds, listening to the rain pounding on the metal roof, trying to discern the direction of the sound. I keep a hunting rifle in one of the adjacent rooms, mainly to keep my wife unaware of its existence. So I quietly grabbed it and made my way down the stairs. At the bottom of the stairwell, I stood there listening for any sound aside from the rain, but everything was silent. Just a constant downpour. I decided to search the entire building methodically, checking every room, closet, and corner, rifle at the ready. In the back room, I found what I was looking for. One of the boarded-up windows had a hole punched through it, with glass scattered on the floor inside, but that was all. No signs of entry, and despite the shattered window, there wasn't enough space for someone to squeeze through. Still, I was filled with paranoia. I spent an additional 20 minutes examining the property, but I couldn't find anything that seemed out of place. I figured it was probably vandals who had thrown a rock through the window and fled when they heard it break. I found some cardboard in one of the other rooms and taped it over the hole before heading back upstairs. I kept the rifle next to the cot just in case, but I was convinced whoever had done it had already left. I'm not sure how long I lay there. Maybe an hour had passed when I heard what sounded like footsteps below me. It was challenging to hear over the rain, but it resembled someone walking slowly, trying to move stealthily amid the storm. Again, I grabbed the rifle and crept to the top of the stairs. This time opting against alerting the potential intruder by walking down. But the footsteps had stopped, and there was no way they could have detected me. I remained frozen for about 5 minutes, feeling beads of sweat form on my forehead. I searched the place again, but once more I found nothing. I started wondering whether I was imagining things, or if whoever had been there slipped out before I noticed. Yet that didn't explain why all the doors were still locked. This time, I stepped outside into the pouring rain and searched the perimeter with the flashlight on my phone. There were no vehicles nearby or any indications that someone had been there. My mounting anxiety was becoming unbearable. Part of me wished I would discover something just to reassure myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I returned upstairs and tried to rationalize what I had experienced. Between the sound of rain on the metal roof and the general creaks that old buildings make during storms, there were numerous explanations for sounds that might resemble footsteps. I attempted to focus on getting some sleep, telling myself I was being paranoid, but that wasn't the end of it. Before I could even settle in again, I heard what sounded like furniture being dragged across the floor below me. This was different, something that the storm could not explain. The unmistakable noise of something heavy being pushed or pulled across concrete is not something a storm could mimic. Not in a million years. This time, I didn't hesitate. I seized the rifle and stormed downstairs, flipping on every light switch I could locate. My anger began to swell, which was probably better than being frightened. I bellowed into the darkness that I wasn't joking, that I was armed, and that I wouldn't hesitate to defend myself or my property. My voice echoed through the empty rooms before fading into silence. Nothing had been disturbed, and no one responded to me. You might wonder why I didn't call the police at that moment. It was partly because I wasn't sure how to explain it to them, but mostly because the property isn't entirely up to code, and that's putting it mildly. The last thing I wanted was to draw official attention to the place. But standing in that empty building, rifle in hand, yelling into the darkness, something suddenly shifted. In a split second, my simmering anger transformed into icy terror. It was more than just an emotional shift. It felt as if something chilling washed over me. I could sense it, and every instinct screamed at me to get as far away as possible. I don't know what triggered the shift precisely, but I knew I must leave. I quickly gathered my belongings, returned the rifle to its hiding spot, and turned off all the lights. The storm continued to rage outside, but I didn't care. I locked the building and drove home through the worst of the weather. It's been a while since that night occurred, but I plan to return in a few days, or whenever I have the chance, really. I want to investigate further. Maybe install a security system to determine if anything actually happens there, or if it was just my imagination. As for what truly transpired that night, I have no idea. Either someone was genuinely there and managed to hide from me, or I'm beginning to lose my mind. Not knowing which scenario is scarier is troubling, and I really don't want to contemplate any potential third option because it terrifies me even more. Story 3 *. My name is Jason. I reside in a fairly rural area where it takes at least a half-hour drive to reach anything interesting. This incident occurred 3 Fridays ago. My friend Leo and I had driven out to a house party in a nearby town. It wasn't a massive bash or anything, just one of those relaxed gatherings where people hang out in someone's backyard, playing beer pong and listening to music. It's a bit college-like, to be honest, but there's not much to do in my neck of the woods, if I'm being truthful. That night, I was the designated driver, so I had been nursing the same beer for about 3 hours while Leo engaged in his usual antics, becoming progressively louder and more philosophical as the night progressed. By the time we left around 1 a.m., he was quite intoxicated, which was amusing until I realized I had become his de facto babysitter. After finally dragging him away from the girl he was flirting with, I ushered him into my car for the 20-something minute drive home. However, the weather had taken a turn for the worse during the party. What began as a light, refreshing drizzle had morphed into a relentless downpour that made it challenging to see more than 30 feet ahead. I had to slow down to about 30 miles per hour on roads I usually sped through at 60. Leo kept complaining first about my driving, then about the music, and eventually about how desperately he needed to use the bathroom. I informed him we were no more than 15 minutes from home, but he wouldn't let it go. His constant whining was becoming unbearable. So after 5 more minutes of his grumbling, I relented and pulled over on a random stretch of road next to what appeared to be cornfields, although it was difficult to discern in the dark and rain. In essence, we were in the middle of nowhere. No houses in sight, No street lights, just farmland on either side of the road. I told him he could go ahead and get soaked for all I cared. But I was fairly certain he wasn't listening because he was already halfway out of the car before I finished speaking. He practically tumbled out of the passenger seat and stumbled off toward the field, disappearing in mere seconds. The rain was falling so hard that I could hardly make him out once he got 10 feet away. The moment he staggered out of sight, I remembered I had an umbrella in my back seat. I sat there for a moment with the engine running, but then decided to take advantage of the stop as well. So I grabbed my umbrella, locked the door out of instinct, and walked off in the opposite direction from where Leo had gone. I found a spot maybe 20 yards from the car, right at the edge where the gravel met the crops. While standing there, I could have sworn I heard something rustling near the car, something other than the overwhelming noise of the storm. Without adjusting my position, I glanced back over my shoulder, toward the car, but saw nothing. I had the keys in my pocket and was confident I locked the car, so I didn't think much of it. I finished up and headed back, only to be surprised that Leo wasn't by the car yet. A few minutes passed, then 5 more, then another 5. Still no sign of Leo. I was getting frustrated. What should have been a brief 20-minute drive home was turning into an ordeal lasting 45 minutes. And I had to wake up early the next morning. I was about to honk the horn when I noticed movement in the side mirror. Leo was sprinting toward the passenger door, and even through the rain and darkness, I could tell something was off. The instant he got in, before he even shut the door, he was yelling at me to drive. As if some kind of primal instinct kicked in, I pulled out of there as quickly as I could. But with the rain making visibility poor, I couldn't speed. Leo proceeded to explain that while he was relieving himself, he thought he saw someone who looked like me to his right. The figure began walking deeper into the field, and in his drunken reasoning, Leo assumed I was playing a prank on him, or perhaps that I was drunker than I had let on. So he followed. According to him, he trailed the figure for a while, unsure of what I was doing and too inebriated to logically process the situation. Eventually, the figure turned round, and at that moment, Leo realized it wasn't me. He claimed he couldn't make out any details in the darkness, but it was clearly someone else. His entire explanation took about 30 seconds, but just as he was finishing speaking, I felt the car start drifting sharply to the right, followed by the unmistakable sound of a flat tire. It was literally the worst-case scenario. Continuing the drive wasn't an option as the car was pulling too severely. Reluctantly, I pulled over. We were maybe half a mile from where we had originally stopped, close enough that it didn't feel immediate, but not far enough for me to feel secure. I snapped at Leo to exit the vehicle and assist, since he was the one who had gotten us into this mess. Yet, when I walked around the car to examine the flat tire, my frustration with Leo transformed into pure fear. Complete fear. There, lodged in the sidewall of my rear passenger tire, was a screwdriver. There was almost a 0% possibility that it happened by coincidence. Someone had deliberately jammed it in there, and with force, too. Observing the depth of the puncture made Leo start panicking, but I quickly told him to compose himself. Both of us hurried to replace the tire, which was particularly nerve-wracking in the relentless rain. I didn't want to dwell on who may have sabotaged my car or why. With each passing second, my hands grew more unsteady. I felt as if someone might catch up to us at any moment. The panic was so overwhelming, it even made me feel nauseous in emotion no nightmare could ever replicate. I was finishing tightening the last lug nuts when suddenly a scream echoed from somewhere behind us. It was clearly a woman's scream, heightening the fear since the person Leo claimed to have seen was a man. I tossed the tools in the trunk, abandoned the tire, and crawled back into the car as quickly as possible. But just as I was pulling away, Leo started pulling at my arm, insisting we return because someone needed help. I adamantly told him there was absolutely no way I was going back, even though a part of me sensed I was making the wrong choice. Leo called 911 as I drove away, giving the operator our makeshift location as best he could. He was furious with me throughout the ride home, exclaiming that someone could be dying back there. Yet I couldn't convince myself to turn around. I felt too frightened. I remained quiet until we were pulling into my driveway, trying to ignore Leo's accusations of cowardice. Instead of just dropping Leo off, we sat in my driveway, attempting to reconcile everything. Leo was convinced that the scream originated from someone being attacked or stalked by the individual he had seen, and he felt guilty for leaving instead of helping. However, I had my doubts about that theory. If someone was out there committing a sinister act against another person, why would they draw attention to themselves by puncturing a passing car's tire? That didn't seem like something you would do if attempting to harm someone without getting caught. Furthermore, if there truly was a woman in distress, she would have been able to see our headlights when we first pulled over. Why wait until after we left to call for help? None of it made sense. While I was articulating my reasoning to Leo, I finally felt I could vocalize what had only been an instinct telling me to leave. The scream might have been part of some trap, perhaps with multiple people lurking out there. It wasn't beyond the realm of possibility. But even that theory doesn't hold up that well. Writing this all out is making me realize it sounds just as absurd. Who, in their right mind, would stop their car on that random road at that hour of the night? There's no way someone would have orchestrated a plan to lure a traveler out of their car, especially in such downpouring rain. Leo and I argued back and forth for a while, ultimately agreeing to disagree. The next morning, I called the police station seeking answers about whether they had found anything. But they claimed their officers had searched the area and found no signs of anyone being there. Even more strangely, they hadn't recovered my tire either, which added another layer of confusion. Though I suppose it's possible they just weren't searching in the appropriate location. A few days later, Leo proposed that perhaps it was actually the woman, not the man, who had punctured my tire in a bid to attract our attention. Why she would do that instead of screaming, I have no idea. The entire ordeal lacks a satisfactory explanation. Yet, I truly don't want to think about the implications if Leo is right that I may have sealed someone's fate by driving away when they were in distress. Asterisk.